Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to current events. Of course, the biggest current event today and over the last few days has been Hamas's invasion of Israel. The existence of Israel is literally hanging in the balance, whether you know it or not. Which side are you on? That will be a discussion for later on. I'm sure that will embody a couple of the topics today. The first topic is going to be about the two-state solution. Douglas Murray has written an article about what he thinks should happen with respect to the two-state solution. It's been a solution that's been on the table for a very long time. Of course, the Palestinians rejected it right off the bat. It was initially when Israel was founded in 1948, it was rejected immediately then. It's been proposed and rejected and proposed and rejected over time. But there are those who think Israel should have a one-state solution. What side do you come down on? Is it a good idea for Israel to absorb Gaza and take it over and make it a part of the state of Israel or not? I'd be interested in your perspectives. We have a great panel here to discuss this today. Also, how would you judge Benjamin Netanyahu's performance? He's been the head of Israeli politics for a very, very long time, and he's been blamed for not being decisive enough to crush Palestine in the past. I remember reading a book by him in the 1990s about terrorism, and he sounded like he was one of the few sane voices out there, but he's definitely ruled in a very different way from the solutions that he offered in his book. He has done some things like forming a national government to take decisive action against Hamas, and he's saying some of the right things and doing some of the right things. But would you judge him positively or negatively? And how would your opinion change over time, depending on how he deals with Hamas? We'll be talking about that topic as well. And here is the one, this is the topic that really gets me, and I think objectivists have a very unique perspective on this particular topic over the rest of the world. I think ours is morally superior. I think it's what any rational person should believe as well. What is the proper way to wage war? Now, Blinken, while acknowledging that 25 Americans have been killed by Hamas in the last week, has said, quote, "It matters how Israel defends itself." And he criticized the use of strikes against Gaza, airstrikes against Gaza. Now, these things are starting to come out more and more as the fog of war clears a bit, and we get to see how brutal the Israelis must be in order to defend their lives against savages. People will start to lose heart. So, how should one defend oneself against not only an aggressor, but a barbarian aggressor? What are the limits that one should have? What are the parameters, the moral parameters that should define one's action? These are things that are questions we must answer in some news venues. I'm hearing the right things. I don't know how long they'll sustain the right moral perspective. Because, as I said, as this advances and as it gets more bloody, people are going to start to get weak in the knees. But I just want to throw that first question with respect to the two-state solution out there to the rest of the panel. Michael, I want to start with you since you're sort of first in my queue. What do you think about the two-state solution? Does Douglas Murray have a point about a one-state solution?
What I think is that the human mind seems to think there's always a solution, and sometimes there just isn't. And I've seen no evidence, either contemporary or through history, that would suggest to me that there is any solution, depending what you mean, of course, by the word, but a solution that would bring peace to the region. I don't think there is one. You have one group of people that is committed to the complete demise of the other group of people. And what do? And when you add to that they're religious fanatics, you can't reason with them. So you get what we have. I used to talk to a rabbi about this very topic, and he said he thought that a two-state solution was the only solution. And he was by no means some bleeding heart liberal. But he just said, what are you going to do? He said, if you make it a one-state solution, then the Jews end up taking care of the poor Palestinians. I don't mean poor and like poor them. I mean financially poor. He said, we don't want that. He said, they have to end up with a state. But I don't see it. I don't think there's a solution to this. I'd like to be wrong, but I don't see any evidence of it.
I don't think that one state implies that you have to put the Palestinian people on the dole. I think it implies other things, but I'll get to that at the very end. Alejandro, what do you think? What do you think? Two state, one state? What does one state mean, or what does two states mean?
Well, I think to answer in principle, I don't think that there's anything for a place to have two states in a similar territory. The problem now is what has happened and the kind of people who are together. There's nothing magic in the land that says in this place there cannot be two different countries, but there's something in human nature that tells you if one of these countries wants to destroy the other, then these two countries won't be able to coexist. So in that context, I would say that there's no possible or viable way in which two countries could coexist without any further violence, or at the end, some annihilation of one of the other one. So in that sense, I don't support the whole idea of leaving two countries as they stand. However, I don't think that there is enough push for that, and I don't think that will be the end solution or the end purpose.
Yes, I agree with you. There's not enough support for the proper solution because it requires something that I don't think the international community has or Israel has. Matthew, what say you about this? Two state, one state?
I think any solution, any peaceful solution, has to start with obliterating Hamas, frankly, because they simply do not accept that Israel has any right to exist. And you can't even talk about one state, two state, whatever, any kind of solution, when you've got one side denying the other side's right to exist in any capacity.
I agree with you, but Razi, let's not forget that Hamas was voted in democratically in 2005 and has overwhelming support by the population. So you get rid of these disgusting, barbarous savages. You kill their leadership in Qatar. You do everything to eliminate them from head to body. You still have a population that for the most part, adopts the ideology, embraces it, and lives by it. Let's not forget that they have anti-Jewish cartoons they teach their kids. There's no formal map of Israel in their grammar schools. They are taught to hate Jews from the time they are old enough to walk and talk. So, Razi, what do you do about that?
Yeah, so I love it when we have, a panel with several people who I have great respect for and completely disagree with on everything you all just said. So I grew up in Israel. I was a leftist kid. Now, leftist in Israel. In Israel, this is the only issue, or at least was the only issue at the time. There was not much talk about, I knew nothing about what socialism and capitalism were. I defined at the time left and right as, the left wants peace, the right wants war. Now, one of the things that, so I was generally, on the side of, yeah, we should give them whatever they want, give them a state, and then there will be peace. The one thing that moved me to the right, as it were, in Israel, was the idea that the settlements need to be removed as part of this peace deal, because the future Palestinian state would have to be free of Jews. By the way, there was no talk about Arab Israelis having to be moved out of Israel, because Israel is kind of a Western state, and you can have minorities living alongside the majority. But that was kind of an obvious part to the left, and it wasn't obvious to me why peace means a state free of Jews, a peace with a Jewish state, for this future Palestinian state. And as we moved along the so-called peace process from the Oslo Accords 30 years ago, which have now come full circle, and bringing in Yasser Arafat, who everybody previously acknowledged was a terrorist, a murderer, the person who I think up until a few days ago was responsible for more deaths of Jews than anyone since Hitler. He would be the head of this future state. We armed him. We gave him territories to control. He was responsible for the security of Israel as far as it came to the Palestinian controlled territories, and of course, immediately the suicide bombing started. And the more control the Palestinians had over territories, the worse the situation became for Israel. In 2005, there was I forget what it's called in English, the hitnatkut was the Hebrew word for it, I think disengagement maybe, where Israel moved all its citizens from settlements in Gaza and all its military from Gaza. And at the time, those settlements were, would occasionally get rockets fired at them, and the town nearby the border would also get rockets fired at them. And we were told, once Israel is not occupying Gaza, there would be no excuse. And if one rocket fell from Gaza, we could completely crush them. And of course, it kept getting worse and worse. So this idea that there could be, a whole state for the Palestinians, and that they would do anything other than continue to try to kill all the Jews is it just has been proven time and again to be factually bullshit. Now, as far as Michael, you said that there is no solution. Well, I think this is kind of the sentiment, even if it's not stated in Israel, because one thing that nobody thinks of is victory, like actually winning the war, actually eliminating your enemies. That is a legitimate possibility. And I heard a commentator on Israeli television, I think it was this morning, say that the people who talk about crushing Hamas don't understand that Hamas is hundreds of thousands of people. And I think about that, and I'm like, so what? Is there a certain number of people who want to kill you beyond which you can just no longer kill them preemptively? So yeah, I would like to see Israel actually defeat the enemy at whatever cost to the enemy. That is not a cost that I that I care about at all. So that would be my
Razi, that's true. That's a very broad generalization. Bring it down to concretes. What does that mean? For me, it means raising Gaza. For me, it means if that causes a refugee problem, anybody who wants to become a part of Israel can become it. It means taking over Gaza completely. It means kicking anybody out who doesn't want to be a part of a civilized country back to Egypt and taking it over and establishing it as a part of Israel. That's a one-state solution to me, and we should be extremely assertive about our moral superiority in that case.
Yeah, before Israel left Gaza, the Prime Minister Ariel Sharon said that there would be a referendum on it, on leaving Gaza, and then he changed his mind, and then he decided that there will be a referendum among Likud party members. I was at the time a Likud party member, and I remember going to vote on this referendum, and then hearing the results, and we won. The no vote won by a landslide, and I was super happy about that. Sharon had said previously, whatever the results are, this is what we'll do. And of course, he heard the results, he laughed it off, and he did it anyway with the vote in the Knesset of Netanyahu, by the way, who we'll talk about soon. And you can maybe guess from my mentioning him what I'm going to say. But yeah, we knew this would come. I don't think Israel should have ever left Gaza. I think Israel should have taken over Gaza in previous operations, and I absolutely think Israel should, first, bomb them from the air to an extent that there is no resistance at all when ground troops finally go in, and then when they go in, that is then a part of Israel.
Yeah, you know what I find one of the most egregious and disgusting elements of the narrative out there is how Israel is called an ethnostate, and it's one of the reasons people pile on from other countries about this ethnostate. When it's the Palestinians in Gaza who wanted to create an ethnostate, you can't have a Jew living anywhere in your territory. Arabs live all over Israel. You can't, that's not an ethno-state. Ethiopians live in Israel. Americans live in Israel. Every nationality and ethnicity around lives in Israel. Yet
Yeah.
in this one patch of place, this group of folks that claim they're fighting an ethno-state are the exact people who want an ethno-state.
But in a sense, it is, and I think Yaron may have said this, and if not, sorry, but this is what I think. So if he did say it, I agree, and if he didn't say it, I still agree. I think he said that it's like a safe space for the Jews, and of course we hear safe space and we think about college kids who don't want to hear their views challenged. Safe space in the sense of you're not getting killed is a good thing. We need such safe spaces.
Yes.
And that's what it is, and I think we see the reaction to the slaughter of over 1,300 Jews in Israel being part of the reaction, being people celebrating in the streets of Western countries, not just Arab countries, people here in London celebrating in the streets, people in New York, in Chicago, in San Francisco. And part of that, at least in London, involved attacks on Jewish businesses. There's always a rise in anti-Semitic attacks when something happens in the Middle East. So it does make sense, unfortunately, for there to be a safe space for Jews. I would love to see the day that that is no longer a necessary thing.
Unfortunately, the implication of ethno-state is very different from a safe place for people who have been historically abused in every country they've ever been in. Matthew, did this change your mind at all, or did this adjust your opinion at all? Do you still think it's just about, I think you're right, Hamas has to be completely eliminated, but I also think that their philosophy is deeply embedded in the culture of Palestine. It's part of the Palestinian identity, is the murder of Jews. And so you would simply have to end that, completely annihilate and destroy all resistance. Do you agree with that? Has Razi swayed you, or do you think there's some other more benign solution to this?
I don't think I disagree necessarily. I mean, getting rid of Hamas means getting rid of Hamas's supporters, right?
Well, there goes 90.
I don't think we're sort of disagreeing as much as you think we are.
Well, that means about 85 to 90% of the population, and that's a hard thing for the international community to swallow. Michael, do you still think there's no solution? We're certainly in a situation where nothing feels good. No.
Well, that's why I said at the beginning, it depends what you mean by solution. If by solution you mean no more Palestinians, yeah, you could achieve that overnight, basically. I'm all for eradicating Hamas. Here's your problem. First of all, you can't identify every member of Hamas. That's number one. You don't know who they are. They don't wear signs that say, "Hi, we're Hamas." Secondly, there's people that support Hamas that aren't part of Hamas. So even if you wiped out all of Hamas, then you'd have to deal with those people. Then even if you wiped out every Palestinian living on Gaza, you're going to have a reaction from other Palestinians in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Israel proper. So that's going to be a problem. Then you've got to worry about the countries surrounding you. You've got to worry about international opinion. As much as I hate to worry about it, it's still there and it's still relevant. So that's what I mean by no solution. Sure, you could obliterate Hamas, but is that going to lead to a peaceful Israel? I don't think so.
Alejandro, does this mean obliterating those various? I mean, to me, it means Iran is the eventual target, since they're the true head of the serpent. They're the ones who have given the Islamicists, the radical religious maniacs out there, the moral justification for going out and committing the atrocities that they commit. What is? I don't care about public opinion, international opinion. Certainly, Israel should be preparing for total war, and I think the United States should be prepared for some form of alliance between these disparate elements. What say you?
Well, if Israel were to declare a war against Iran as well as many other of these factions, I would celebrate it and support it. I think that in principle, you cannot have peace if you're surrounded by people who want your destruction, and that their own aim and their own rhetoric and their own whole way of living and justifying their existence and the existence of their country is related to destroying it. If that's like, how on earth could you achieve peace with that? Like, if someone's core purpose and semi-valuing way of seeing your life is seeing you dead, how could you make agreements, deal with them, trade with them? It isn't until you are able to take control of the most of the deepest factions, the factions that are more supportive of this, and then you show the more or less rational people in the country that that's not a way of dealing with you, then you will continue having a problem.
I agree with you. Peace through strength, and you have to be assertive and morally justified in what you're doing. And right now, it seems like the West and Israel lacks that moral fortitude. And speaking of lacking moral fortitude, let's get to Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been more or less the leader of Israel for quite a long time. I remember reading his anti-terrorist book in the 90s. I think I might have read it after the bombing of the World Trade Center. I wanted to understand how we could fight this enemy. And he seemed to have some very, very powerful solutions, but I don't know that he's enacting them now. We have Hamas. We've had Hamas for many, many years now. They should not exist. They should not have been allowed to exist. We have this notion in the world that the democracy is an ideal, even if the population votes in a very malicious and hostile, aggressive, and uncivilized government. That, hey, it's what they want, they should do it. But Hamas should have been annihilated early on. Matthew, what do you think of Netanyahu now, in the past? Are you familiar with his administrations in the past, how he's dealt with the enemy, and what do you think of what he's doing now in response to Hamas?
Oh, I'm aware he's sort of been around a fair amount of time. I mean, I remember when I was at school way back in, this would have been the 1990s. It was Netanyahu in charge back then, and sort of a similar situation. I think that would have been before Israel withdrew their military out of Gaza. I think that was the early 2000s. I don't have the exact date. But it has to be said, and none of Netanyahu's administrations, for all his rhetoric, has he actually been able to deal with the problem. You know, there's been a lot of talk, there's been a lot of bravado, but he's never managed to nail it. And he hasn't followed through.
Do you agree, Alejandro? I mean, your theme seems to be one that I agree with. You can't negotiate with people who want to kill you. There is no negotiating with them. You simply have to overwhelm them and well, kill them, because that's what they're trying to do to you. And show those who would support those people that the same end would come to them. Has Netanyahu demonstrated any kind of force or suggested the kind of leadership that could help Israel do that kind of thing?
Sadly, I don't know enough about Netanyahu in the past, but let me tell you what it's most worrisome to me right now in the most selfish way which you can put it. And that is that he has, like in Spanish, you have a proverb saying, like, if the dog barks a lot, it won't bite you. And I've seen Netanyahu talk a lot about what he's going to do and how these people are butchers and really, really bad. And he shows pictures. But so far, I haven't seen him do a lot. And the reason why I'm so concerned selfishly is that when you have such an action and you have no counter-reaction from your side, then you're teaching people, you can do this, you can do like really bad stuff, you can butcher. So no problem, we'll hit you, like slap you in the hand. If that happens, can you imagine what would happen to the Western world in the future? Like this could be like if the reaction isn't, maybe you could talk about war and overwhelming Gaza and even taking over the territory. But if nothing happens, and one of the major worries that I have is really nothing happens, is that maybe you could see this type of things, this type of actions in the West. See it in Paris again, London, the US. I hope not. I really hope not. But what can you expect if these kind of actions don't entail something that will be remembered in these people's minds until the end of times?
Michael, are you skeptical of what Alejandro said? Are you on that side?
I don't know much about Netanyahu either, but I do know that he's been in power on and off for, I think, 25 years now, and he hasn't solved the problem. And this happened on his watch, and ultimately he has to take responsibility for it. So that's about the gist of my opinion of him. I've heard him talk. I remember hearing him talk after 9/11. He always sounded like a very, very bright guy, knew his stuff, but you ultimately have to judge a person by results. So if I was Israeli, I think I'd vote him out.
Razi, well, if you on a grading scale from A to F, how would you grade Benjamin Netanyahu's performance through his entire administration, and now that we're in this crisis?
I mean, when I think of Netanyahu, the word that comes to mind begins with an F. But I've been trying in recent days, both on the channel and on Twitter, to keep it family friendly, as I say. Although ARCUK members who are active on the WhatsApp group have seen me kind of not hold back as much. But yeah, maybe I'll keep the swear words behind the paywall, which is particularly difficult when talking about Netanyahu. We were talking yesterday about the protesters and how sometimes, when you're very young, you can get away with things that you can't as an adult because maybe you don't know better. Netanyahu knows better. Yeah, he wrote that book. He has read books. He's read Rand. I'm sure he's read John David Lewis. He knows better, and yet he's Israel's longest reigning prime minister. Things have gotten worse under his leadership. Ironically, every other role that Netanyahu has been in, he's been fantastic. I think in some cases, probably the best in Israel's history, both as a UN ambassador to the UN, as foreign minister, as finance minister. He took Israel from like the brink of the economy collapsing to being very strong. So yeah, he's not a good leader. I'd also like to vote him off. I don't know who would replace him, but yeah, a big part of me not being optimistic. Although all Israeli prime ministers have weak responses when it comes to military action that needs to be taken, but. Yeah, in this case, Netanyahu has already proven himself a failure and somebody who can't be trusted with Israel's security, among other things.
And we're already seeing that now with surgical bombing and the massing of the IDF on the borders for a house-to-house urban fight that could go on for months and months and months and months and just deplete the resources and manpower of Israel. I don't think Israel or the or the communities, the international communities have the stomach to do what actually needs to be done. And that gives bad guys lots of permission to keep doing bad things. Catherine gives us $1.99. Thank you, Catherine. Wes Stewart, $10. Mark Thomas, $5. Dr. Binswanger yesterday talked of superstitious mystics in Palestine. How should we deal with superstitious mystics in the West who support Hamas? I want to give that to you, Razi, first off.
I'm really gonna struggle to keep it family friendly here with it, because that's a question I don't really fully have the answer to. I mean, there's the easy answer, which is, if they're celebrating on the street, like no matter what views you express, you don't have the right to block the road. So that's the easy answer. Just in terms of dealing with them, I think I said this yesterday, I wouldn't go have a conversation with these people. There are people I disagree with on many topics that I would like to sit down and have a long discussion or debate with. They are so far beyond the pale as far as I'm concerned that I certainly, write them off as human beings who I can deal with in any way on a personal level. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, actually, I will say this, and this might be a problematic example, but when you talk about free speech and what government should do when it comes to people expressing views that are particularly abhorrent, I think of NAMBLA, the organization, the U.S. North American Man Boy Love Association, an organization that advocates for relationships between adult men and children. So you can say, they should have the legal right to express their views, but also there should be, the part of the government's job is to protect people and protect children. So I would like, when they think about how to protect children, I'd like to say, okay, maybe we should look into these people specifically when it comes to crimes against children, because if you're advocating for that, maybe there's more of a likelihood that you would actually engage in it as well. And I do the same with people who are out on the streets celebrating the mass murder of Jews. I'd say, you know what? Let's look into these people a little bit. If they're just expressing their despicable views, then there's nothing legally we can do. But let's see if they're actually ready to act in any way on that.
There's something we can do if they're clogging up the streets and preventing us from going where we need to go. Michael, do you agree with that, or is this a surveillance state gone mad? Are we crossing some kind of threshold with state power when we say people who are protesting or celebrating these kinds of acts should be looked into?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly that if people are blocking the roadway, they can be removed. And I also agree wholeheartedly that people need to be allowed to express their views, however heinous they might be. I haven't honestly, Razi poses an interesting example with NAMBLA, and I've honestly never thought about it. My instinct is to say I wouldn't want them looked into just because they express that view, because it's just it strikes, like you said, of the surveillance state. On the other hand, in terms of NAMBLA, you're advocating illegal activity, not just illegal activity, but severe rights violating activity. So I'm persuadable on that to look into them. Now, when you're talking about protesters supporting Hamas, are they advocating? The problem is like in the case of NAMBLA, they're advocating having sex with children everywhere, right? So when people are protesting in support of Hamas, are they also advocating doing things in the area where they're protesting? So if they're protesting in America, are they advocating that terrorists strike in America? If they're in Britain, are they advocating strikes in Britain, or are they just supporting the attacks in Israel? Because then you run into a murky thing where somebody expresses a foreign policy belief, so we're going to look into them. That's kind of dangerous, I think.
Let me I have a quick follow-up. So if, let's say you're in the US and you form the South America Man Boy Love Association, and you advocate for such relationships not in North America, then should the government not look into you?
The problem is that with NAMBLA, it's not an enemy type of thing. It's a violation of children. So if you're saying, I think that men should be able to have sex with children, I don't see how that you could possibly restrict that to a given geographical location. Whereas if you're arguing that somebody has this right to strike Israelis and you're celebrating it, that doesn't necessarily transfer into they should be striking everywhere.
I would have issues with that. I'm sort of on Razi's side here, but we have a legal expert here, Matthew Humphreys. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you think of this. Should the state have the power to look into people who are expressing a favorable perspective towards a terrorist organization and celebrating the murder of other human beings? I think it's very likely that many of them, if not emotional supporters, could also be financial supporters of that kind of thing, if not direct supporters of that kind of thing. How far do you think the law should go in that respect?
Well, let me tell you firstly what the law in England actually is at the moment, because people may not realise this. Hamas has been declared a proscribed terrorist organisation in this country, and it is actually illegal to express support for them. So those people who were out celebrating in London the other night, I would advise to be very, very careful about exactly what they are doing, because potentially they are going to land themselves in prison.
Well, I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, here I'm on Michael's side in that we have a First Amendment. You have a right to express your thoughts and feelings, don't have the right to impede other people's rights. But given that, does it impede your freedom, your right to free speech, free expression, free assembly, if those charged with the protection of innocence can now investigate you? You've committed no crime that we know of other than to express an opinion. Can they investigate you in the interests of preempting any form of violence that you may be a supporter of? That's a very dangerous territory to me. It smacks of the act that Bush passed out here that enabled the NSA to start collecting data on people, rather generally. What say you with respect to that?
I agree, it is very dangerous territory, and what I would suggest is that any law of that nature should essentially have what we call a sunset clause, so that it is reviewed by whether it's Parliament here or the legislature or the Knesset or whatever country you want to talk about, so that the law is reviewed on a regular basis, and that politicians elected representatives can consider how well it is working and whether it is in fact overstepping, or whether it is justified on the basis of how it's worked up to that point.
This is a really, really sticky ground. Razi, do you have anything to say to that? You make laws that could potentially subject innocent, though despicable people to investigations, to prosecutions for having the opinions that they have. But if you reviewed them every couple of years to see if they were actually the laws were actually doing the right things and protecting innocent people and putting bad guys in jail, is that good for you?
I mean, I have no issue with sunset clauses, generally. I think, yeah, in terms of, again, Hamas, Michael was saying that NAMBLA advocates for having sex with children. Well, Hamas is killing children. And adults. And yes, they claim to do it in the name of resistance, but I don't think attaching some sort of political argument to it justifies, well, certainly not justifies, but makes it any different in nature. So yes, certainly the people out on the streets on Saturday were celebrating these acts. So in terms of at the very least looking into them, that is something that I would like to see, because Britain has had homegrown terrorists, and Britain has actually had terrorists who, at least on one occasion, terrorists who traveled to Israel and committed a terrorist attack there. So yeah, I think the government should take,
Yes, one who famously beheaded people, live and on camera for everybody to see how savage he was. Ashley shrugged for $1.99. Have you heard about the threat of 1013 being bad? October 13th, Hamas calls for global jihad on Jews. Listen to this. If I didn't think I could get any more mad, then I have to hear this. What do you think? Is this a plausible threat? Is this a plausible? I think it's a plausible threat. I think they should be taken seriously. What say you guys?
Sure. I mean, I don't know what we can do about it other than be aware of what's going on. I wasn't aware that they made such a threat, but they did, and they're certainly barbaric enough to carry it out. But I mean, my problem with stuff like this, with preemptive strikes, and that's ultimately what this would be. It would not it'd be preemptive in the sense that nobody's actually hit me as somebody of Jewish descent. Is that when you start making laws, do you, anybody on this panel, think if you say, okay, we could start looking into people, for instance, in the last example, who are supporting Hamas by celebrating, does anybody believe it would stop there? That the next time they don't like somebody that's protesting something else or celebrating something else, they won't be looking into them? And how long until they say, you know what, there's this group of objectivists who say that taxation is theft, that undermines the state, maybe we should be looking into them? And it just creates.
But it seems like, it seems like the groups we're isolating here, like NAMBLA, for example, or the people who are celebrating Hamas's murders. They're celebrating violence against people. They're celebrating the initiation of violence against people, the subjugation of people, the exploitation of people in a violent, having sex with a child is a despicable act of violence against a child, and exploitation against a child. So it's just like us outlawing communism at a certain time in America. What we were doing was outlawing a political organization that committed murder and acts of espionage and attempted to undermine rule of law and create chaos in the United States. Now, I don't think those, and I want to ask Matthew something like this. I don't know that those definitions have to be so malleable that they could be grafted onto any circumstance and used by the state to justify, the heavy state tactics that we see pretty much everywhere today. Matthew, what do you think of that?
What definitions do you mean? Sorry, I didn't quite.
Well, so I mean, Michael seems to be concerned about, rightfully so, that once you start giving the government power to investigate people because we consider them the enemy of the people or a threat of some kind, that definition of who is a threat always expands. It always expands, and it ends up taking up the entire population, giving the state undue authority. But I'm saying that the groups that we particularly singled out are violent groups. NAMBLA, it may not be something that most people associate with violence, but having sex with children is a violent act. You are essentially taking somebody who has no moral context, that doesn't have. They're a ward of a parent. They're not completely independent being, and you're abusing them. That is an essentially violent act. Now, if you are able to limit it to those who endorse not violence against the state, but rights violations, as NAMBLA does, as Hamas does, do you think there is a place for the government to do that and still remain limited?
I do, and I mean, I'm thinking again of the law I mentioned a few minutes ago, that Hamas being a prescribed terrorist group. Well, it's one of a number of groups which are on that list, but every group on that list is there for a very specific, clear, definite reason. They are all either Islamic terrorist groups, far-right terrorist groups, neo-Nazis, etc. They're all groups which either advocate or in some cases have engaged in terrorist violence, and they're on the list for that reason. So it's kept very specific as to what groups it applies to, and so I think it can be done. It's not a law that seems to be expanding to, certainly so far, to take in non-violent groups. They're quite specific about who gets put on that list.
And Matthew, this question is sort of to you, but it's also to Michael as well. How do you think Hamas responds to seeing these supporters at Harvard, in Australia, in the streets of New York? It's a sort of moral support. Now, you may not be giving material support to the enemy, but that moral support goes a long ways towards keeping the ethical fuel underneath these movements fired. And in a sense, it makes me, and Matthew, you tell me if I'm way off here, it's sort of being an accessory to a crime after the fact. You're giving moral support to these people. That keeps them in action. It keeps them doing what they're doing. And it seems like you are an accessory to a crime. Any thoughts with respect to that, Matthew or Michael?
Well, one does have to wonder how many of those sort of supporters in university campuses, etc., actually genuinely understand what Hamas are doing, how they are ruling the Gaza Strip. I mean, I've seen imagery of sort of gays for Hamas, etc., that kind of thing. Well, I mean, gays have no rights at all under Hamas in Gaza. They're pretty much operating Sharia law as far as I can understand. I sort of wonder if there's a certain naivety there.
Yeah, I'm sure there is, especially in the universities. But Michael, are you an accessory to a crime when you are morally supporting it, even if you're ignorant?
Well, let me ask you this. Suppose you got tired of my mouth and you beat the crap out of me. You're a big guy. I think you take self-defense classes. You beat the crap out of me. While you're beating the crap out of me, Alejandro sees it and says, yeah, awesome. That's great. Should we arrest him? Has he violated my rights? Has he initiated force against anybody? I don't think so. I'm not going to be happy that he's wishing for me to get beat up when he's cheering it on, but I don't think we can arrest him.
The fact that he doesn't stop me, the fact that he cheers me on while I'm doing something that causes extreme bodily.
What obligation does he have to intercede, to put his well-being at risk?
He's not just not interceding. I understand that his self-interest may lie in the fact that he can't defend himself against me, and he's not going to get involved in that situation out of fear. But he's doing worse than that. He's promoting the violence. He's excited the violence. He's incentivizing the violence. I don't know
about that. I mean, you were beating me up already. I don't know that he's incentivizing it. He's cheering on something that's going. Now, if beforehand he came to you and said, hey, I think you should go beat this guy up, that's a conspiracy. But if he's just cheering after the fact, or I think that's really dangerous territory. And I think those are very dangerous decisions also to make when emotions are running high, because emotions run high and we end up making decisions that we later regret. And I don't like it.
I agree with you. I don't think we should pass legislation in the heat of a moment like this. Alejandro, you've been brought into this fight. You've seen me beating up Michael, and you've cheered it on. Are you an accessory to this? Matthew, you're probably dying inside with this amateur legal discussion.
Yes. I would say that I would try to intervene, but I think that.
Well, thank you.
The crucial issue maybe it's the association with the criminal association. I think that's a crucial issue more than its support or the things that you're saying about that, and that's what I think was immoral and probably illegal back in the 50s with the Communist Party in the US.
Right. So, but a supporter could suggest that you have some form of a supporter emotionally out on the celebration lines could suggest that you are a supporter materially, that you are somehow involved in the organization. And could that not be probable cause, Matthew or Alejandro, to investigate? Alejandro, you go first. We'll get our total amateur perspective out of the way before the professional comes in and corrects us.
I think that a person is master of his silence and slave of his words, and I do think that kind of talk or that kind of support would be a good link towards people that want to harm someone else.
Yeah, Matthew, what say you?
Well, I think to actually be an accessory to a crime, you would need to be doing more than sort of happening to come across it and cheering it on. There would need to be some sort of I guess some sort of prior understanding. To use the analogy you were using, there would need to be some sort of prior understanding that Michael was going to be attacked, and some sort of agreement to kind of stand by and in a sense support it and cheer things on. I think just happening to wander up and start cheering probably isn't going to be quite enough.
Well, it looks like Pellegrino 0, Liebowitz 1. I think
and Humphreys is a genius, by the way. I mean, I knew it ever since I saw him on Facebook. This is like the smartest commentator I've ever come across.
Yeah, I personally hate the trend now that people on the metro and subways think it's cool to film others being abused and beaten up by crazy people. And I understand not getting involved if you don't think you can. I understand that, but in some cases, cheering on the violence, I think that's certainly doesn't speak well of our culture at the moment. Mark Thomas with $10 wants to clarify what he said before. I meant non-Muslims that sympathize with Hamas by their own kooky beliefs, but themselves problematic in other ways, hostile, altruistic, who support UN statist overreach. You mentioned, yeah, the world is full of kooks, and they all come out of the woodworks during moments like this. Just say anything pro-Israel on social media and watch the kooks come out of the woodworks. It's like turning off the lights and all the rats and the cockroaches come out. So our final topic for today is, how do you fight a war? Now, this is a subject that's preoccupying the pundits, the news. It's Israel has always been told to hold back any responses, to keep them proportional. I am not for proportional responses. As anybody knows, you break into my house, you are not going to get a proportional response. Once I identify that you are a bad guy in my house, you will likely not walk out. I'm just telling you right off the bat, for anybody who's watching and thinks, I think I want to go into Pellegrino's house and do something bad, you will probably not walk out. So I don't believe in proportional responses. I believe in ending the threat permanently. I think that's the way you fight a war. Razi, I want to start with you on this. What do you think?
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that we have basically less than 7 minutes for this topic, so I'm going to try to be brief because we have the briefly objective in 7 minutes, and we don't want our two channels competing with each other. By the way, the briefly objective video is the West is morally bankrupt. That is in just under 7 minutes. Yes, and this is why when I mentioned Israel using the international community as an excuse not to act, the more decisive action, the earlier they would have taken decisive action, the less the world, the so-called international community would have been in an uproar. We hear these calls for proportional response. We hear the calls for minimizing civilian deaths. That is not how you win a war. That is how you lose a war and get your own soldiers killed. So I do not support that.
Okay, Alejandro, do you agree or disagree?
Completely agree. War is a really terrible thing. I wouldn't like to be in one. I wouldn't like for war to continue. If there was a way to stop it, I would take it. But when you're at war, and when someone has declared war on you, not only by their words, but by their actions, you have to answer. And answering implies do or die. Do whatever it takes to win, or if not, then you will suffer the consequences. If you don't do it, if you do half-hearted response, then something else will happen, and something else will happen, and something else will happen, and someday you will realize that you should have fought the war earlier, and you could have won it instead of later.
Matthew, do you agree with that or disagree?
Well, I think in international law, clearly the position is you are supposed to attempt to be proportionate and attempt to avoid unnecessary civilian deaths. But the reality is, if you imagine World War II being fought like that, the Allies probably wouldn't have won.
Indeed, and we'd still have Nazism and imperialist Japanese at our doorsteps. Michael Liebowitz, agree or disagree?
Kind of agree. I think that a war should be fought as viciously and as ruthlessly as possible to eradicate the enemy, but I do think that steps should be taken to minimize civilian casualties as much as possible while accomplishing the end of beating your enemy. That's a lot easier for me to say than it actually is to implement in practice. And ultimately, civilians are going to die, but if it can be avoided, I think it should be.
Well, I think we all somewhat agree on that. Well, folks, I hope this show has helped you to see this very puzzling, crazy morass of an issue a bit more clearly. I hope it's getting you to check your premises, because that's what you need to do. And stay tuned for the briefly objective, right, Rossi? That's what's coming up.
Yeah, Mark, can I just briefly
go
say
ahead.
something about the briefly objective, which is,
Yes.
so, YouTube favors, the algorithm favors certain types of content. That is not the content we have on this channel. I love the content we have on this channel, so we'll continue to do that. But the briefly objective is a way to kind of get shorter, more bite-sized content that's algorithm friendly. It's now we relaunched it recently. It's these videos are edited. There's images that you see. You don't see our faces, which is maybe we'll make an exception in Alejandro's case when we have a video of his. But generally, you see images that are related to the topic. There's music. It's basically we'll try to be more YouTube friendly. And I would, some videos on that channel have done really well. We're now trying to do almost daily videos just during the war. I don't think we can continue to do that over time. Marco and Richard, who are co-hosts on this show, are basically managing that project and doing almost all that the work on it. So thanks, guys, if you're watching. So yeah, I'd encourage everybody who's watching to watch those videos, watch the video now as it premieres. That'll help with the algorithm if there's many views for everybody watching live. Like it, share it, subscribe to that channel. It has 300 and something subscribers, so not many. Yeah, that will hopefully bring in people also to this channel as well.
We do have another super chat. Rozzy, did you want to get to that really before we go?
Yeah,
because this is sort of dropping a bomb, folks. I apologize for dropping this bomb, but Paul Cohen for $9.99 says, I'm in Israel now, and Israeli TV commentators state that one can't cut off water and supplies forever to Gaza because we can't let 2 million people starve. And there we go. The tide is beginning to turn. It is a complicated situation, folks. Do yourselves a favor, watch the Briefly Objective, like and subscribe, get into this show and spread it because it needs to spread. All right, folks, that's it for us today. And we will see you tomorrow. Peace.